Hi everyone, my name is Mary, and I'm 16 years old. Tell me, what is your relationship with your parents like? Maybe you are friends with them, or you have difficulties communicating. I had such difficulties with my dad. Listen to my story, and you will find out who he really is. His name is Kirk, and to be honest, he's my stepfather. I don't remember my real dad. He left when I was very young. That's why my mother was the one raising me. She's always treated me like a real princess. But a year ago, she met someone, a serious military man called Kirk Harrison. They had dated for a while, and then got married. That's how a new father appeared in my life. I couldn't bring myself to call him that though, even though he was very nice and not too strict. He even took me to an amusement park and bought everything I asked for. The story I want to tell you about began one summer day when my mother suggested I spend holidays at a summer camp. I thought, this is going to be great! I'll spend whole days swimming and playing volleyball on the beach. And in the evenings, I'll dress up and go dancing. Of course, I agreed and ran to pack my suitcase. I took the prettiest dresses and lots of sunscreen. Kirk said that he would take me to the camp and make sure that I settled in well. We chatted all the way there. I was being polite, but that was it. When we arrived at the summer camp, I immediately felt that something was wrong. First of all, we were in the woods, and there was no beach. Secondly, instead of beautiful houses, there were barracks, and children were wearing military uniforms. What was going on? Where was I? I asked a girl walking by what it all meant. She replied, "Are you new here? My name is Lily. This is the Military Patriotic Summer Camp Young Marines. Come on, I'll show you around." What? What Young Marines? Where had we come? I wanted to find Kirk immediately, but for some reason, he'd left right away. I felt abandoned. Lily took me to the barracks where I would have to live and helped me pick up my uniform. I had never worn anything like it and felt quite insecure. When my new friend saw what was inside of my suitcase, she burst out laughing and said that all of my things would be useless in the camp. The phones were taken away and hidden in a closet in the counselor's room. I spent the first night of camp weeping into my pillow. I wasn't used to being treated like that and didn't understand what was going on. But the worst still lay ahead of me. My hell began the next morning. We were woken up at 6 in the morning and forced to run. I almost died. Then, we were given a completely tasteless breakfast, and the training began. We were taught how to tie knots, survive in the wild, and all sorts of other things. Who needed to know any of it? But, did you know what else was weird? I saw a portrait of my stepfather hanging on the wall next to those of the camp directors in the Hall of Military Valor. I was horrified to find out that Kirk Harrison was the one in charge. It was his camp. He'd known where he was taking me. I rushed to look for him around the camp at once, but my stepfather was nowhere to be found. Someone told me he was away on business. I wondered what he was busy doing and felt more and more nervous. In the evening, we sat around the fire and told each other scary stories. I felt uneasy enough as it was. They just had to add horror stories on top of everything else. My friend Lily told a story about a crazy lumberjack living in those woods. A long time ago, he had simply been forgotten in the forest by his friends. He couldn't find his way home and had got lost. No one had seen him since. Only an ominous shadow of a lumberjack could be seen in the woods sometimes, and people kept going missing in the forest. That was the last straw. I didn't want to stay there any longer. I just wasn't used to that kind of life. So, I decided to call my mother and tell her everything at once. Oh, and my stepdad was going to get in trouble for all of it. Maybe Mom would even divorce Kirk after she found out where he had dropped me off. But they had taken away my phone and locked it in the closet with the rest of the gadgets. I had to get it back. I waited until everyone was asleep before getting out of the barracks and sneaking into the counselor's room like a real Marine. It wasn't easy. I came across counselors several times and had to hide or crouch down. Still, some of the skills I'd learned in the camp came in handy. Finally, I got there and immediately found the cabinet with all the phones. I managed to open it and found my iPhone. At last! I immediately dialed my mother. When I heard her voice, I couldn't help but burst into tears. I told her where that nasty Kirk had taken me and how bad things were there. He'd lied to me, so maybe he was lying to her too. But my mother just laughed for some reason. She called me silly and said she had known about everything all along. About the camp and what I would have to face there. It turned out that my mother had asked my stepfather to take me to the camp herself to spend some time alone with him. I couldn't believe it. My mother was on his side. I looked through her Instagram and saw new photos of her relaxing with Kirk. I burst into tears. They'd both betrayed me. What was I supposed to do? The next day, the torment in camp began all over again. But I firmly decided that I would run away. I shared my plans with Lily. She tried to talk me out of it, but I didn't listen to her. I couldn't stay there any longer. So, I secretly packed some of my things in my travel bag, waited until the guards had gone to eat breakfast, climbed over the fence, and escaped from the camp. I spent a long time wandering in the woods, trying to get to the road, but the more I tried, the deeper into the woods I got. Eventually, I lost my way and began walking in circles. I was lost. That's when I got really scared. It was night, and I only had half of a bottle of water and a couple of candy bars with me. I wouldn't last that long like that, especially since the nights in the woods turned out to be very cold. I curled up and leaned back against a tree. It seemed like I'd made a terrible mistake by running away from the camp. And then I heard the crunch of branches. Who was there? My heart started pounding in my chest. Could it be a bear? But then, I distinctly heard the sound of footsteps and saw a dark silhouette of a man between the trees. I was so horrified, I couldn't move. I immediately remembered the horror story Lily had told everyone around the campfire. It was the crazy lumberjack! And he had come to kidnap me. I jumped to my feet and ran. Branches were whipping my face painfully, but I didn't stop. I ran for a long time, but the footsteps behind me didn't stop. I heard someone shouting, but couldn't make out the words. A crazy lumberjack was chasing after me! At last, my strength failed me, and I fell. At that moment, I heard someone approach. I looked up in horror and saw my stepfather. Kirk said he'd come to save me. I could barely find you. Why were you running away? He asked. My stepfather built a fire and took out some marshmallows. What did it all mean? He smiled sadly and said that he loved my mother very much. He also wanted to be friends with me. It turned out that my mother had asked him to send me to a military camp so that I would become more disciplined and responsible. Kirk had also wanted to spend some time alone with my mother. And I was probably going to have a little brother or sister quite soon. I don't know why, but that news made me very happy. I could babysit the baby. But to do that, I really needed to learn some discipline. I couldn't even look after myself. Kirk and I were sitting by the fire, roasting marshmallows. At that moment, my stepfather seemed like a very good and kind person to me. I forgave him. The next day, we returned to the camp, and he suggested that I go home to my mother. I thought about it. Maybe she and my stepdad were right, and I really could learn a lot there. Moreover, I was already getting used to it, and it would be really fun with Lily. Anyway, I told Kirk I was staying there until the end. He was very happy with my decision. So, I spent most of the summer at that camp. They taught me a lot of interesting things. I learned how to stand up for myself, survive even in Alaska, and give first aid. You might be surprised, but I became a completely different person. When camp came to an end, I didn't even want to go home. I'd made a lot of new friends among the young Marines. We agreed to meet there next year. And when we were driving home, and Kirk was telling me how much my mom had missed me, I called him Dad for the first time. He smiled slightly and paused. And then I saw tears rolling down his face. Kirk was happy. I hope our family will be strong and happy, that I will be able to take care of everyone. I can do it now. Write in the comments, would you like to go to the military patriotic camp with me? And don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because we're a team now.
Hi everybody, my name is Tony and I'm 18 years old. Tell me, do you have a big dream? Something you would devote your whole life to achieving? I've always wanted only one thing, to be able to fly. And you know what? I did it. However, I had to sacrifice something for that. I began to dream about flying when I was still a child, as soon as I learned how to walk. And of course, I began to experiment. First of all, I made my first wings all by myself and tried to fly up from an armchair using them. Naturally, my first flight ended with a bump on her forehead. As I got older, I started coming up with various devices that would let me fly. In high school, I turned my bike into a helicopter and jumped off the roof with it. The flight was short and ended with a broken leg. But that didn't stop me. As years went by, I read a bunch of books and watched a ton of videos about flying. My father was a farmer, and I had a huge garage with tools at my disposal. So I started inventing stuff. But one day, I saw a video where a guy was demonstrating a flying suit he had made by himself. I realized that was just what I needed. I spent a long time studying how it worked, drawing it and buying the missing parts on the internet. When my father found out what I was building, he asked me to stop my dangerous experiments. He said it would be better if I was doing something useful to help on the farm instead. But I didn't listen to him. My girlfriend Ginger didn't support my dream either. Well, she was just a girl anyway. I didn't expect anything different. Only my best friend Jim seemed genuinely interested in my progress. I spent a lot of time preparing for the flight. I set up all the technical systems and trained every day to keep my balance. After all, flying with such a thing would not be easy. After I received the last missing part in the mail, the fuel system supply, the flying suit was ready. I decided to take my first test flight over a river behind the farm. So, the jet engines on my hands were working. I increased the output and slowly flew up. Wow, I took off! You can't imagine how excited I was at that moment. I decided to do something incredible and went as fast as I could. All of a sudden, the left engine began to fail, and I lost control. What had happened? I hit the water at breakneck speed, bounced off the surface, and finally ended up on the shore, where I hit a rock. I came to a hospital. The doctor told me I had got lucky. I only had a slight concussion. But what was really bothering me was what had happened to my flying suit. Why had it suddenly broken down? After all, my calculations had been correct, and I had rechecked everything 100 times. Oh no, it couldn't be. That's when I understood everything. Someone had deliberately messed with my suit. Someone didn't want my dream to come true. But who could it be? I went back home and started to think. Who would benefit if I failed? Wait, what if it had been my father? After all, he was always saying I was wasting my time with my attempts at flying. I couldn't believe it. Did he really not want me to fulfill my dreams so much that he decided to ruin everything by putting me in danger? We had a huge fight. I told him I knew everything. He was the one who had messed with one of the engines. My father replied that I must have hit my head hard during the fall because he would never have done that. But I didn't believe him. We had a big fight. I said that I didn't want to see him again, took my flying suit, and left. I didn't like what my father had done to me. I thought he'd share my dream, but where was I to go? That's when I thought of Jim. He was my best friend, and he definitely would not say no to me. Fortunately, Jim lived nearby. I went to his house and asked him to let me live with him for a while. Jim agreed, but for some reason, without much enthusiasm. It seemed to me that he was not happy with me being there. I had nowhere else to go and just put it out of my mind. I began to repair my flying suit in Jim's garage. It took up all of my time. I wanted to experience that magical feeling of flying again. And then, one day, everything was ready. The flying suit was working again. I was so happy that the first thing I wanted to do was share the news with my girlfriend. I called Ginger, but she said she couldn't come because she had a bunch of homework at college. I was a little upset at first, but then I decided to play a prank on her. I took my flying suit and went to her college. Ginger lived on the 3rd floor, and I thought she would be very surprised to see me hanging in the air outside her window. I started the engines and slowly flew up. The suit was working as it was supposed to. I was flying again. I carefully got closer to my girlfriend's window and looked inside. But what was it? She wasn't busy with homework at all. And she wasn't even alone. My friend Jim was sitting next to her, and they were kissing. I lost my balance from the shock and almost fell down. I got down somehow and sat on the ground. What was going on? I couldn't believe my eyes. So Ginger had been lying to me. Now I knew where Jim was staying after work. They had been dating behind my back. I was walking back and thinking about what had happened. And then it hit me. So that's who had caused my accident. It hadn't been my father. It had been Jim. He had deliberately done something to the engine so that something bad would happen to me and he would be able to date Ginger without any problems. She had probably known about it as well. The thought made me feel uneasy. I hadn't expected such betrayal from the people closest to me. I could even have been killed. If they'd realized that as well, then it had truly been a serious crime. And I decided to punish them both. I needed to gather more information for my plan to work. Proof they'd been together for a long time and were hiding it from me. So I started following them around and filming everything. When we were together, I would smile and pretend that I didn't know anything. I even managed to log into Ginger's Facebook page and copy her chat with Jim. Turned out they'd been deceiving me for a long time. And although they hadn't discussed their insidious plans in the messages, I knew that it had been them. So after I gathered everything I needed, I went to the police with the evidence. I told them that my friend and my girlfriend wanted to get rid of me to be together. There was more than enough evidence and they were both arrested the very next day. I felt like a winner, but what was I supposed to do next? I couldn't go home because I was still fighting with my father. Staying in Jim's house felt wrong too. I rented a room in a small hotel with the last of my money and devoted all of my time to my dream again. I improved my flying suit and was glad that no one was going to stop me from doing what I wanted. I was a little upset that I had fought with my father because, as it turned out, he had nothing to do with it. But I told my father that he was still to blame. He had never believed in me and didn't want me to follow my dream. I decided to fly again to get my mind off things. After refueling the suit, I put it on and took off again. I was so happy. I felt free as a bird. After all, that's what I had been dreaming about for so long. I was very high when suddenly one of the engines turned off once again, and I began to rapidly fall. I tried fixing it while falling, but it was useless. Something major inside was broken. The ground was approaching fast and I felt terrified. I tried to slow the fall down using the engine that was still functioning. It worked, but I still fell into a tree and lost consciousness. When I came to, I was back at the hospital. I was in a full body cast. Aside from the concussion, both of my arms were now broken and my spine fractured. The doctor said I had gotten very lucky, but didn't value my life at all. I had to spend a lot of time in the hospital. I could hardly move. I needed help. Someone had to take care of me, feed me, change the bandages, cheer me up. And then I thought, who would do it? My father was still upset with me, and Jim and Ginger were clearly not going to be the ones to do it. I was left alone, and frankly, it was not very pleasant. So I was in the hospital, and no one came to see me. Various thoughts were running through my head. I'd also just received an email from the company where I'd bought the fuel supply system for my flying suit. They wrote that they'd found faults in a whole batch of their goods. A defective system had been sent to me by mistake. We hope our mistake didn't cause you any serious problems. The email ended with a smiley face. That's when I felt uneasy. Only then did I understand why my flying suit had been constantly breaking down. No one had broken it on purpose. There had just been one faulty part. But it wasn't because of it that Jim and Ginger had got hurt. It had all been me and my stupid stubbornness. My girlfriend had probably grown tired of listening to my naive dreams about flying, and then she met Jim, a normal guy with adult interests. Maybe he deserves her more than I do. What do you think? Write in the comments, and don't forget to share my story. Perhaps it will help others who also have impossible dreams.
Hi guys, my name is Margot, and I'm 17. Tell me, what would you do to get back what was stolen from you? Would you even break the law? Listen to my story, and you will know what I did. Yes, this is jolly important, because now I'm in deep crap. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because I really need your help. So, it all started a week ago when my parents decided to go on vacation and leave me alone. Dad told me head on, Margot, you're an adult now. We don't think anything terrible will happen. Take care of yourself in our home. I pretended to be very sad, and that I didn't want my dad and mom to leave. In fact, I was elated inside. I would be free for the whole week. When my parents disappeared, heading for the airport, I immediately called all of my school friends and threw a party that evening. Of course, my boyfriend Rick immediately started to grumble. I wanted to spend this evening with you alone. Why do you want this party? What a party pooper he was. And also vindictive and touchy. As soon as I smiled at someone at school, he immediately stopped talking to me and giving me gifts. But I wasn't just going to do what Rick liked. So, I immediately started preparing for the party. In the evening, half of the school gathered at my house. There was loud music, drinks, and fun. The person who paid the most attention to me was Cliff. He had just transferred to our school, and I liked him immediately. He was brutal and confident. We saw each other several times at school, and now we could get to know each other better. Cliff asked me for a slow dance, and I couldn't say no. Our faces were very close. And then, I noticed Rick's frown. Oh no! I completely forgot about my boyfriend! And that meant niggles and hair splitting were ahead. After the dance, Rick took me aside and menacingly asked me what it all meant. I said I was just dancing with Cliff. What's the big deal? Then Rick started chewing me out and squabbling. And that's when I realized I didn't want to date him anymore. I was tired of this relationship. So I pushed Rick and said, "Leave me alone! That tears it! It's all over between us." It was loud enough for everyone present to hear our ruckus. He blushed and went into the other room without a word. And I felt that I immediately became much easier and calmer. No more toxic relationships. I spent the entire evening with Cliff. I never regretted my decision. Rick never showed up at the party again. Someone told me that he sat sadly in another room for a while and then left. The next morning, Cliff helped me clean up the house because it looked more like Winterfell after the White Walkers invaded. My ex-boyfriend, Rick, didn't even call me. I was a little uneasy, but overall, I felt like I did the right thing. In fact, I thought I was starting a new relationship, which of course, I was very happy about. I started dating Cliff and having fun. He was comfortable to stay with, not like Rick. Of course, I went to his Instagram profile and watched what my ex was doing. Oh, that was interesting. Rick started posting pictures of him having fun without me. Cool cars, restaurants, fancy clothes. Under them, he wrote that shopping helped him forget the one that was not worthy of him. He meant me. It was so funny and naive. Resentful Rick behaved like a brat. Cliff and I laughed together at his posts. In retaliation, I also decided to troll my ex and began to put photos on my page every day where we rocked with Cliff. I can imagine how mad Rick was when he saw them. But what happened next immediately spoiled my playful mood. I ran out of food, so I decided to walk to a supermarket. The money my parents left me went all the way to the party, so I decided to take some from my dad's safe. I knew that there was a tidy little sum, and he would not notice the loss of a couple of 10 spots. But when I opened the safe, I went weak in the knees. It was empty. I went hysterical. If my dad found out that I hadn't kept the family budget up, I would be in trouble. I immediately realized that it had been done by one of the guests at my party. While we were having fun in the other room, a thief snuck in and found the safe. And it was not difficult to open. Dad was a forgetful person, and the password to the safe was hanging right on the door. I began to think, who could have done this? And then it hit me. Rick! Of course, he was so angry with me that he decided to take revenge. It was his style. Now it was clear where he had got the money that he was spending on clothes and restaurants. What a rascal! I decided that I needed to return my parents' money at all costs. And I needed to do it quickly. Dad and Mom would arrive in 4 days. But how should I do this? I couldn't just turn up to him and demand the stolen cash back. He would just boot me out. And then I decided on a bold plan. I had to make up with Rick and become his girlfriend again. Then he would return the money to me. If not, I'd take it anyway. I hated to do it, but I had no other choice. I called Rick and apologized shyly. I told him I had made a mistake in breaking up with him. I'd like to get back. But my ex answered sharply, "I don't want anything from you. Just kiss off. Now I have everything I want and I don't need you." He hung up. You scoundrel, I thought. You're wasting our money and bragging about it. So, I decided to step up the attack. I deleted all the photos with Cliff from my page and posted a bunch of plaintive images with the message that I really missed my ex. I started to like all his photos, but it didn't work again. Rick was silent. I sat at home and came up with a new plan to integrate myself with my ex. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Cliff stood grimly in the doorway. He said, "If you decided to leave me and go back with your ex, you would have said so." Dang! I completely forgot that he was subscribed to me and saw everything I did on my page. I took him inside and told him everything that had happened. Cliff was in shock. He immediately asked how he could help me. And then, I came up with an 100% plan. We spied on Rick and waited for him to leave the restaurant. And we caused a fake scandal that my ex was supposed to see. Cliff was shaking and cursing me. I was even able to cry for real. And Rick reacted. He rushed to my aid and pushed Cliff away. "Take her, she still loves you," Cliff said viciously and left. I looked at my ex and realized that our plan had worked. Rick looked at me with tender eyes. I assured him that I loved him and no one else. My boyfriend was smiling contentedly, but he didn't say anything about the money. So, I decided to return it in the same way Rick had stolen it from me. I offered him to throw a reconciliation party. He was so happy that he immediately agreed. We called everyone we knew and threw a party at his house. There was music playing and everyone was having fun. But I wasn't in the mood for fun. I waited for Rick to let his guard down so I could do what I wanted to do. We danced until morning, and in the end, my boyfriend finally gave up. He collapsed on the sofa and immediately fell asleep. I went around his house and found what I was looking for pretty quickly. There was a Nike box on a shelf in his room, and it was full of money. My money! I scooped everything and left quickly. I stuck a note on Rick's forehead as I left. "You don't have to look for money. It's not yours anymore." I got home and Cliff met me. "How did it go?" he asked. I showed him the money and smiled. We put them in the safe, and I just realized how tired I was. I returned the family money to its place and could meet my parents with a clear conscience. I still had half a day before they returned, so I embraced Cliff and immediately fell asleep. I was awakened by a knock on the door. It was Mom and Dad. I was so happy to see them and wanted to introduce Cliff to them, but he must have already left. My parents started unpacking and telling me how great their vacation was. Then I heard my dad's voice from the other room. "Margot, why is the safe open?" I turned pale, rushed to him, and saw an empty safe. I couldn't say a word in horror. I clearly remembered myself putting the money there. Where were they? Before I could say anything, there was another knock on the door. It was the police. They said they came to arrest me on suspicion of fraud and theft. We were all in shock. It turned out that after Rick woke up and found the money missing, he immediately went to the police. In addition, he attached a video from a surveillance camera that showed me stealing from him. I started shouting that I wasn't a thief, that I was just getting my own money back. And Cliff would be able to confirm my words. Cliff's number was disconnected. They took me to the police station and held me there for a while. The next day, my parents took me out on bail. Cliff never showed up at school and disappeared from the city. And then, I began to guess who was really behind the whole situation. Please share my story. It wasn't my fault. I just fell victim to a clever con artist, and now I owe a lot of money to Rick and his family.